If you're like me, then you've been around young children more times than you can count. As you start to converse and watch them, you'll start to see this cloak of innocence that usually most children have. This cloak is what makes them oblivious to the world around them. But the question is, why was this cloak formed, and why does it fade away as you get older? The questions to this live in the brain. There are 5 main parts of the brain, and the brain is the organ that controls basically the actions you think, the thoughts you do, and the things you remember. The 5 main parts of the brain are the frontal lobe, the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the cerebellum, which is connected and is right next to the brainstem. The frontal lobe basically shows your cognitive function. Your occipital lobe controls your vision. The parietal lobe controls along with the sensory cortex, it basically controls your senses and like memories of sense type things, like your basic 5 senses. Your temporal lobe is basically your hearing and the memories that you have. And your cerebellum works together with your motor cortex to basically control movement and balance. And it all forms the brain. So, how this relates to children. As a fetus, your brain is 25% big, which is about this balloon being blown up about this big, or this big. And then as you grow and you reach about 3 years old, your brain gets 80% to your normal size, which is about this big. Okay, so as a fetus and then as a young child, you will learn language, emotional control, vision, hearing, your basically significant symbols, motor control, and impulse control. And then when you become 4 to 6 years old, that's when your advanced language and reason come in. Not reasons such as, hey, this thing is bad, or this thing my parents told me I can't get. More like, hey, I want this. Hey, get this for me. I will cry and you will get it. Reason. And then you age a bit more. Nothing really happens during your period from 7 to 8. It's basically just a refinement of the things that happened when you were 4 to 6. But from 9 to 12, you will start to basically refine your motor skills because there are changes happening in your body, puberty and all that stuff. And then you will also start to learn basic algebra and really advanced arithmetic easier. And then you will start to basically refine your, reason skills a bit more, where you stop having those tantrums. And then at the beginning of teenhood, that's when you start getting the basic logic and emotions, and that's why teenagers usually break out in tears for some random reason, because of the fact that that part of their brain is growing and changing. And then you also gain judgment skill, which is basically the things that you need to use in school and home to basically do things correctly. I mean, they have the skill. We all know they just don't use them. And then at 15, you start specializing your brain, which means that you start shutting down parts of your brain, like your motor cortex, which is about right here, because you might not be an athletic person, and then you might advance your frontal lobe. So then you start gaining more cognitive functions. And then at 17, you gain abstract thought, which means that you start to think outside the box. This is where artists usually flourish at a period, because they're able to think of more broad and unique ideas. And then finally, at 21, at the beginning of adulthood, you start to finally learn executive thinking, which means you can finally be the leader that you were born to be, or basically the person who follows somebody or leads, or somebody who's kind of in the middle. everything goes right in a child's life and nothing abnormal happens, then their innocence cloak should just be basically like a snake shedding. It should just come off eventually. But then there are some instances where it was the equivalent of the innocence cloak being just ripped from them. And that's where changes start happening quicker and more abstract. I can use myself as an example for that. In 3rd grade, I didn't really have that many friends, and I was kind of like, I only had math and my academics to think about. So then, as this started going on, my frontal lobe started developing, and then also I had soccer and sports, so then my motor cortex and my parental lobe and my sensory cortex started evolving as well. But then I started to gain friends, like, not that many, but like a good select few. So then everything basically just went back to normal. But then, in 4th grade at the end, I had to move. I just made those friends like in the beginning of the year, and now I figured out that I had to leave them and go to this unknown place. And that kind of scared me. So then when I left, I felt as if something was being taken away from me. That was my innocence cloak being ripped apart from my soul and being burned with a flamethrower. So then, as I got to the place where I am now, my cognitive function and running ability, which is sensory and motor and parental, along with my temporal, basically all of my brain, it just started hurting. But I could learn things so much quicker than I could before. And this is basically what happens to people who either experience something that's heartbreaking for them or a traumatic experience that could give them PTSD, like, has the ability to. But it gives them something so much greater, but with a horrible cost. Like for me, I have limiters on both my physical body and my mental. So I learn things at a normal rate, but I can pick them up really easily. And it's basically like specialization. So for people who only have basically physical enhancements, it's basically limited on their body, like on how their body's growing. So their body's growing at a rapid pace, but they still have the limits of their body, but they don't think they have the limits. So they just go out of control and like a crazy rampage. Inversely, with people with cognitive increases, they basically rampage in their own academic, mathematical, language types way. But I have both, so I have to keep my emotions in check, or who knows what I'll do. Happens, as I researched, I figured out, I thought it was only me, but there are other people around the world who are experiencing these sort of things. In conclusion, innocence is a great thing. Let your child experience everything that they can, and they will basically start to get more mature and more adaptable to the environment around them. But if you push your child to the limits, well, that messed up.